Thanks for watching Spooky South Coast, and be sure to click the subscribe button and enable notifications with the bell icon to stay up to date with future videos.
Elvis Presley's father, the first words out of his mouth, "Oh my God, they murdered my son."
When did things start to shape up to you that things didn't look right with Elvis's murder? Did you with Elvis's death? Did you always kind of feel that was the case?
Yeah, I mean, I was raised an Elvis fan, so I knew more about this guy, I think, by the time I was 10 years old than most people did. My mother was just in love with this guy, and still is. And I never believed what they said when he died. And the story continued to change. First, it was a heart attack, and then later on, it was drugs, and later on, it was suicide. And the story just continued to flip flop, and so. It started out, I didn't start out to write a book about him or anybody else. It just started out casual reading. I got to get to the bottom of this because it doesn't make any sense. I was watching the 30th anniversary of his death, and I'm watching them interview the people who allegedly found the body. And I understand, as the passage of time goes, some things are not going to be the same. But, they were getting some things garbled that were pretty big things, like where the body was found. Yeah. So after that, I started to really dig into it, and my investigation into it really it was 5 years, and I uncovered some things that really shocked me. So when I finally figured out that the man was, fell into foul play when he was murdered, and I finally got it through my head, I walked around with this really dark cloud over my head for months. And I was talking to my friends about it, and they said, you're going to have to write this book. Everybody's got to know what you uncovered. And I said, they're going to think I'm out of my mind. And he said, well, let them. But you're going to have to tell everybody what you uncovered. I think if Elvis was alive, I think he'd like the truth to be told. So that's kind of the backstory as to how this whole thing happened. It's a lot. I mean, I've got the first one came out, Who Murdered Elvis, came out in 2013, and I just came out with the 5-year anniversary of it a couple of months ago, and that's everything that's happened after the last book was printed. The story continues to evolve, so I've definitely got my hands full.
Well, I mean, that's what I thought, growing up and hearing originally, you always hear the story that Elvis died on the toilet. That's kind of what everybody discusses when they talk about his death, but I always assumed that the heart attack story was a cover-up for the fact that it was an overdose, and that that's just what they wanted to let the public know, because at the time nobody really knew that Elvis had addictions. It was something that was kind of kept under wraps, and they didn't really talk about publicly. I mean, now people talk about it, but back then I could understand wanting to have that public story of it being a heart attack, which was very plausible considering his lifestyle. But also at the same time, for you to say, well, that kind of made it not sit right with you, I'm just looking at it and taking it at face value to say, okay, the heart attack was to cover up the overdose. But you're saying that even that story didn't seem to make sense to you.
No, I think, like I said, what's in legend and lore and what really happened at the autopsy table was entirely two different things. I had a chance to meet, through my elongated investigation into this, a fellow named Dan Warlick, who was at the autopsy, and he was also at Graceland. He investigated the crime scene, and the rubber started to meet the road. And I started to put the lore aside, and I started to actually dig into, the facts of the case. This is interesting because, I'm not the only person who thinks that this guy was murdered. And the evidence is really kind of in my favor. Elvis Presley's father, the first words out of his mouth, "Oh my God, they murdered my son."
Wow.
Said right in front of Dan Warlick. He was so convinced that Elvis was murdered that he hired 2 private investigators to solve the murder, and they were making pretty good progress, but Vernon died 2 years after Elvis, and the case kind of went cold. So my book actually picks up where Vernon's book left off. So Vernon knew that Elvis was murdered. Susanna Lee, one of his co-stars on Paradise Hawaiian Style, she came right out and said, in 1978, she went on television and said, "When are we going to solve the murder of Elvis Presley?" Dr. Nicopolis, if you go to my website, if you go to whomurderedbooks.com and you go to the Elvis pages and you go down to the bottom, there's a video clip there where Dr. Nicopolis, his doctor, says Elvis was murdered. So, I mean, it's incredible. I started to dig into this and I started to uncover some pretty telling information that there was foul play going on. And then when I uncovered what everyone else said, it just blew my mind. Dick Grobb, Elvis's chief of security, he has a book out, The Elvis Conspiracy. I'm not sure if it's in print or not. It's a hell of a book. And he came right out and said that he was murdered. I think he was one of the first ones to come out with a book to that. So as much as I'd love to say that I have done all the research in this, I can't do that. There was 30 years of research into this before I got into it. But I think that what I've done is finish it and put a logical conclusion on it and really expand the body of work that has been done.
Well, I mean, these are folks that were around Elvis. These were people that knew not only him, but knew the circles that he traveled in. And that is what I think is the fascinating part of this story is we're not talking about, a John Lennon situation where it's just some crazed fan that got involved in this. We're talking about there was a conspiracy here. There was something that went beyond just somebody wanting to murder Elvis. This was something that stood for something bigger.
Yeah, in 1970, so you're exactly right. You never argue with a man when he's right, and you're right. In 1977, there were more people who wanted Elvis Presley dead than alive. He had changed his will. There were people working on the inside who were extraordinarily upset with him. He started to fire some of the people around him. There was girlfriend changes going on, and March of '77. This guy is in Hawaii with a handful of his closest friends, and he said, hey, I'm going to start making some changes. So he started losing weight. He started to get in better health, and he announced that there were some changes coming, and the changes played a pretty good part in what happened to him. It's really interesting. His manager was highly involved with the mob, and Elvis Presley got a federal narcotics badge from Richard Nixon.
Mm-hmm.
These two are not going to end well. This situation cannot end well. So it's very interesting to know that the backstory on Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, is it's just incredible when you think about it. He was managing other people before he got to Elvis, and I'll give you a little list of here. Minnie Pearl, Hank Snow, Gene Austin, June Carter Cash, of course, went on to be Johnny Cash's wife. Roy Acuff, and the biggest one that he had was Eddie Arnold. And he had been playing these, you don't book any one of these acts in Las Vegas back in the day unless you deal with the owners. And the owners of those casinos were all mob back then. Two in particular, Milton Prell was out of the Detroit mob. He was out of that syndicate, and he owned the Sahara, the Aladdin, and the Mint. And you don't book anybody in those hotels or in those casinos to perform unless you're dancing with the devil.